This video guide is going to focus on how to counter the Ultralisk with all three races in Starcraft 2. There's very few Ultralisk counters, and I am using the HOTS online unit tester map. I'm going to turn on chitinous plating, and we're going to look at different ways to counter the Ultralisk. So with Protoss, we're going to start with Protoss. We'll do all three races. There's really only two good counters for the Ultralisk, and one is going to be the Immortal, which when in equal supplies can just stand there and attack Ultralisks with no problem. It just does a ton of damage versus armored units. It's got the hardened shields. They're just good. And with a little bit of micro, if there's no other units, you can really do well. Barely take any damage, if you take any at all. So this time it didn't pierce the shields. If you do a little stutter set micro, since the natural solution is Immortals. If you're using air units, the only viable solution I consider is the Void Ray. And the reason other air units don't work is because the Void Ray is going to be able to tank. It's going to be able to do enough damage that the Ultralisk can't ignore your air units. With other air units, you're going to see the Ultralisk do a ton of damage and just ignore the air units. Void Rays do enough damage that they can just shut down Ultralisks no problem. Let's compare that to like a carrier. And what you'll find is, let's add our probe in. So we're using something like carriers. The Ultralisk is barely going to take damage. With chitinous plating, this is the damage equal upgrades a carrier does to an Ultralisk. Carriers are really slow, so an Ultralisk can just ignore your carriers, run past everything into the main base, and just start destroying buildings. And by the time you actually destroy the Ultralisk, you literally have nothing left. And if the Zerg follows up with Zergling run-bys while you're trying to deal with the Ultralisks, it's just going to be a mess. So, Void Rays are Immortals for Protoss. Nothing else works. Okay. So, Terran. Marauders are the natural Ultralisk counter. And you do need stim, and you do need to micro. So, what you're going to do is, and that's how it's done. If you want to have medevacs with the Ultralisks, in case you get backed into a corner like that, just scoop up your units and boost away, drop them where you have range. Never want to stand there and try to attack an Ultralisk. And as far as factory units go, it's kind of hit and miss. I mean, siege tanks are okay when they're in a good position. They need to be like on the high ground, protected by buildings. They need some kind of defense. If you just use siege tanks outright versus Ultralisks with nothing but units in front, they're terrible. They're just not good. The Ultralisk is a counter to the siege tank. But I want to, I don't want to discount the fact that, if you had a siege tank on the high ground blasting away at Ultralisks, it's going to do well. Thors do okay. They're kind of an even trade. They're not a strong counter, and you'll see here. The only exception to this is if the Thor has an upgrades advantage, it'll do pretty good. But as you can see, it's just okay against Ultralisk. It's not super strong. The best way really is the Marauder. But if you're using bio units, you're going to probably add in some air, or at least add in some structures for defense. And so what I mean by that, air. Banshees actually do okay versus the Ultralisk, just from a DPS perspective. They're fast enough to chase down the Ultralisk, but they will take a while to kill the Ultralisk. And you really want good micro like that to maximize your damage. So the Ultralisk tries to ignore the Banshees. It's not going to do well, but even then I want to consider the Ultralisk, or the Banshee super strong. And the battlecruiser's okay, but only because of Yamato. Otherwise, it's worthless against the You know, it can do good DPS, but they're just so slow. A good player is just going to run away from your battlecruiser and just start destroying buildings and SCVs and planetary fortresses while your battlecruiser attempts to attack the Ultralisk. So, really, Terran Marauders are the way to go. You can use air units or buildings again. Really, buildings are the key. So if you have an let me just talk about that. Let's say you have an SCV, a Thor, 3 Ultralisks, and a 2 siege tanks. Or 3 siege tanks. So if we started this and siege tanks are in the back, and now if the Ultralisks want to get in, it's not going to be quite so easy. So I mean, obviously with the wall, it's they're not going to do so well. But without the wall, this is not a very even fight. And even with the wall, it's not that even of a fight. As you can see, if I microed this Ultralisk and went around, I probably could have destroyed that. So don't consider a mech an Ultralisk counter. Another thing, just real quick, to add on for mech units is planetary fortresses. They do well versus Ultralisks because the Ultralisk, it can so easily ignore things. The high HP, the armor, the damage of the planetary is really nice. So if the opponent's using Ultras, you add on some PFs if you can help, if you can. And that's really it for the Terran counters. No unit is particularly good versus the Ultralisk. Zergs often don't get Ultralisks though because they cost so much gas, and PVT or TVZ is pretty gas intensive for the Zerg if they're using Banelings and Mutas. So for Ultralisks, or for Zerg, again, there's not really a great Ultralisk counter. Roaches will trade good on a cost perspective, but not on a supply. So about 5 Roaches is the equivalent of 1 Ultralisk cost-wise. In fact, I think it actually favors the Roaches are actually a little bit cheaper, same resource cost, so less gas, but the supply counts aren't even. So if one opponent has maxed out on Ultras, you can't max out on Roaches and do okay. It won't work. But if it's smaller armies, it does work. But you do have to micro your Roaches. You have to shoot and pull back. That way you're only taking 1 Ultralisk kit for every time the Roaches swing, which is, a good trade. And with Roach speed, this is definitely easier. So Roaches, they trade well with the Ultralisk. Really, other than that, the only good unit is the Broodlord. Hydralisks are weak, Zerglings, Banelings are both weak. Infestors, the Ultralisk is immune to the fungal growth and neural parasite. Queens don't have the DPS for Ultralisks. Mutalisks don't either. Corruptors, no real use there. I mean, I suppose in theory you could use Corruption, but it's not enough. It's not worth it to add on the 2 supply cost. Broodlords are really the only option. Swarmhosts don't do well versus the Ultralisk. And I'll just show you that real quick. If the Ultralisk wants in equal supplies, it's just going to roll through the Swarmhost. Even with Locusts, even if I try to unburrow these Swarmhosts, Ultralisks are so much faster, and they destroy Locusts so quickly, and then there's just nothing left. It's not a very close matchup. So, really, your only option is Broodlords and Roaches. So the good thing about Broodlords is they're so slow, so the enemy will try to avoid them, but they'll get trapped. The Ultra will get trapped by the Broodlords, or the Broodlings. They can't actually very easily move around. They get stuck. So it's hard for it to run away if it's trying to run away. So that's just something to keep in mind. So, but since Ultralisks really don't have a counter, they honestly don't have a counter for Zerg, aside from mass air. So they are very good and very popular in ZVZ. So something to consider. If you can get them out, you generally are doing very well. Most ZVCs don't last that long, but if they do, It just rolls through everything on the ground. And that's really it for this video. Just to rehash, Zergs can use microed roaches to trade on a supply count, but ultimately you're going to want to get out broodlords to stop ultralisks. Terrans can use microed marauders and banshees or battlecruisers, and they can use mech units, but only if there's the fortified position with buildings. And Protoss players have the easiest time since they have the immortal, and the Void Ray is a good choice too. So hopefully this video is helpful for you and you get to stop losing to ultralisks. And subscribe for updates and new videos, and I'll see you in the next video.